This is Prep Mode 911. If you're hearing this, well, you're probably not. But I still say it. Every night. Habit, I guess. Once upon a time, this voice bounced off broken buildings, into ruined homes. Now it just echoes in my head. Still, I talk. Because silence kills. Tonight, I'm not in the shelter. I'm not even in the ruins. Something happened. Be careful, tonight, we're going to try to make it through another one of these long nights together. Z. And if you're still with me, tell me, fellow traveler, where in the world are you listening from? What's your local time? Update your status update. Tell me. Did you ever steal ripe fruit? From the overgrown gardens of a world that forgot your name? Did you drink from a river? Without asking what century it had flowed through? Have you hidden in cellars lined with salt and sorrow? Flinching at every footstep? Across floorboards older than your own bloodline? Do you still remember how to spark fire from stone? Can your fingers still find north? I want to hear from you. Scroll down. Drop a comment. Write like you're leaving a journal entry, like you're leaving a sign for someone else to find. You don't need to be tough, just be real. Me. I'll read every word. Maybe I won't reply right away, but I'm still here. And if you're hearing this, it means you're still breathing. And in this world, that's a damn miracle. Now, soften the candlelight, the stars are out, the pine trees carry a gentle scent, and I've just lit a small fire. And you can turn on a fan for that soft background hum. It's the perfect time to ease into tonight's journey together. The ale, warm and earthy, settled in my stomach, a comforting anchor in the swirling chaos of my mind. It was a strange kind of peace, that first taste, a brief respite from the relentless questions of how and why. As the mild buzz faded, the daily rhythm of the village began to assert itself. My eyes, now more accustomed to the subtle movements of this ancient world, picked out a growing hum of activity around the church square. Today, it wasn't just beggars and daily chores. Today, the village was preparing for something bigger. A festival of saints. The air, usually redolent with wood smoke and damp earth, now carried faint, sweet notes of something unfamiliar, perhaps freshly cut flowers, or incense from within the church. People were bustling, their faces alight with a quiet anticipation. Banners, crudely stitched but vibrantly colored, were being hung from windows and across the narrow lanes. Children, usually engaged in somber tasks, chased each other with uncharacteristic abandon, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. I watched from the relative anonymity of a shadowed doorway, a silent observer of a world steeped in faith. Pilgrims, I realized. They were arriving in trickles, then streams, their cloaks dusty, their faces weary but resolute. They carried staffs and worn leather pouches, their steps purposeful as they converged on the church. This was a mainstream historical fact that came to mind. Pilgrimages were a central part of medieval religious life. People undertook arduous journeys, often on foot, to visit holy sites, seek healing, or atone for sins. It was a profound act of devotion, a physical manifestation of their spiritual longing. It was a kind of extreme spiritual tourism, without the gift shops. Then, the procession began. Not a grand, opulent display, but a humble, deeply moving one. A priest, his vestments simple but clean, led the way, holding aloft a small, ornate reliquary. Behind him, villagers and pilgrims followed, their faces upturned, murmuring prayers. The air filled with the low, resonant chant of Latin hymns, unfamiliar to my ears, yet oddly powerful. And there they were, the relics. Bits of bone, fragments of cloth, splinters of wood, all housed in decorative containers. A quirky, unusual detail, I noticed one reliquary, carried by a solemn-faced man, was shaped like a tiny, silver hand, inside which a blackened fingernail was visible. It was said to be from a saint who had cured leprosy. The sheer specificity of it, the tangible, almost grotesque reality of these sacred objects, was both fascinating and unsettling to my modern sensibilities. My logical mind, a product of scientific skepticism, wanted to dismiss it all as superstition, as a primitive form of magical thinking. But watching them, seeing the profound belief in their eyes, the genuine awe and hope etched on their faces, I couldn't. This wasn't just a performance, it was their reality. Their faith was a living, breathing force, a source of comfort and meaning in a world that offered little material solace. It made me reflect on faith then and now. In my time, faith was often a private affair, or relegated to specific days of the week. Here, it was communal, public, interwoven into every aspect of life, from the ale taster's silent cross to the beggar's humble prayer. The religious element was overwhelming, almost palpable. It wasn't just about the relics or the chants, it was about the collective spiritual energy, the shared conviction that divine power was real, accessible, and intimately involved in their daily lives. Many documents leave open the possibility that the cult of relics, while officially sanctioned, often veered into folk practices and local superstitions, with people attributing various powers to specific relics based on local legends rather than strictly theological doctrine. There is no consensus on this matter. And perhaps, there will never be consensus on the blurred lines between official dogma and popular belief. To them, a piece of bone wasn't just a relic, it was a conduit, a direct line to grace, a tangible sign from God. I thought about my own journey, the impossible leap across centuries. Was it fate? A cosmic joke? Or, perhaps, a divine trial? The questions swirled, unanswered, but watching these people, their unwavering faith in a world so much harder than mine, a strange kind of humility settled over me. Maybe, just maybe, there were things beyond my understanding, things that couldn't be explained by science or logic. Maybe the universe, or whatever force had brought me here, had a purpose I couldn't yet grasp. It was a profound psychological shift, a reluctant opening of my once closed modern mind to the vast, mysterious possibilities of belief. For the first time, the idea of a miracle didn't feel entirely outlandish. It felt possible. The Festival of Saints, with its solemn procession and murmured prayers, slowly dissolved into the more familiar bustle of Market Day. As the last of the pilgrims dispersed, their religious fervor a fading echo, the village square transformed. Wagons rumbled in, piled high with goods, and the air, which had briefly held the ethereal scent of incense, now filled with the earthy aroma of livestock, fresh-baked bread, and the pungent tang of unwashed bodies. This was the vibrant, chaotic heart of medieval life, the marketplace. My hunger, which had been briefly forgotten amidst the spiritual awe, returned with a vengeance. Begging had provided a few meager crusts, but I needed more. My eyes, now accustomed to scanning for resources in a ruined world, instinctively sought out anything of value. My gaze landed on a handful of scavenged nails I'd pocketed earlier from a crumbling wall near the alehouse. In my old world, they were worthless. Here, they were iron, hammered, shaped. They had value. I approached a stall where a grizzled man was bartering with a farmer over a sack of grain. He had a small wooden box of miscellaneous ironmongery, rusty hinges, bent hooks, a few well-worn nails. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. My first true foray into medieval commerce. It felt like playing a game of high-stakes poker where I didn't know the rules. "Good sir," I began, my voice still a little rough, trying to mimic the careful cadence I'd observed. I have these. Perhaps you have need of them." I held out the nails, my palm sweaty. He looked at them, then at me, his eyes shrewd. "Fresh, are they? Not stolen from a coffin, I hope," he grumbled, with a surprising flash of humor that made me crack a faint smile. A subtle, quirky detail, that macabre humor, a testament to a life lived close to death. He then poked at them with a grubby finger. "Might be. What do you seek in return?" "Food," I said simply, cutting to the chase. "Bread. Or anything." He considered, weighing the nails in his palm. 3 nails for a small loaf of rye bread, he finally offered. Rye bread. Dense, dark, and probably hard as a brick. But it was food. Agreed, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The transaction was made, a small, significant exchange that felt like a huge victory. It was a mainstream historical fact that barter was the primary form of exchange in much of the medieval economy, especially in rural areas. Coinage existed, but its scarcity meant that goods and services were often traded directly. My nails, humble as they were a tangible commodity in this world. It was a refreshing change from a world where everything was reduced to abstract digital numbers. As I chewed on the incredibly tough rye bread, savoring its earthy flavor, I wandered through the market, my ears perked for more than just prices. The market was a hub of gossip, a living newspaper. From the fishwives, their hands perpetually smelling of brine and scale, I learned the most. They stood over wooden tables piled high with fresh catch from the river, their voices loud and boisterous. Cutting through the din, heard old Master Ilara's daughter, she's with child again. For months past her husband died, too, one cackled, elbowing her neighbor. The neighbor sighed dramatically. A miracle, or a curse, depending on who you ask. The religious element, ever present, even in the most scandalous gossip. The idea of a miracle or a curse was their default explanation for anything outside the mundane. Many documents leave open the possibility that local saints and their miracles often became intertwined with village gossip and folklore, creating a tapestry of belief where the divine was deeply personal and often very human. There is no consensus on this matter. And perhaps there will never be consensus on how much actual belief shaped these narratives versus simple entertainment. Another chimed in, lowering her voice conspiratorially. And the Lord's tax collector, he's coming early this year. They say the Lord needs more coin for his crusade. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications of distant wars and forced levies. This was the raw, unvarnished truth of medieval life, far removed from the romanticized tales. It was a reminder that while faith was central, so were power, politics, and the brutal realities of feudal economics. I learned about the seasonal crops, the price of wool, the latest sickness sweeping through a neighboring village. It was like tuning into a very specific, very local radio station, broadcasting entirely in analog. I chuckled softly to myself. In my world, I could pull up global news on a device smaller than my palm. Here, information was organic, slow-cooked in the cauldron of community chatter. It was a powerful lesson in listening, in observing the nuances of human interaction that had been lost in the constant digital noise of my past. It was also a surprisingly effective way to learn about the social dynamics, the hidden anxieties, and the resilient humor of these people. The market day faded into a long, quiet afternoon, the chatter of fishwives and the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith giving way to the gentle hum of everyday life. I found myself drawn away from the public spaces, my steps leading me down a narrow, shadowed alleyway between the bakery and a cluster of humble cottages. The air here was cooler, damp, carrying the faint, sweet scent of old bread and the sharper tang of wood ash. It felt secluded, a perfect place for introspection, or for something unexpected. And then I saw him. A figure, cloaked and hooded, pressed into the deepest shadows of the alley, his back to me. He wasn't begging, or loitering. He was doing something else, something furtive. He held a small, leather-bound book, its pages a pale rectangle in the gloom, and he was murmuring to himself, his voice a low, urgent whisper. As I drew closer, my curiosity overriding my caution, I recognized the distinctive cut of his cloak, the heavy material, a priest. My survival instinct screamed at me to retreat, to mind my own business. But something held me there. The intensity of his whisper, the way he clutched the book as if it were a forbidden treasure. I decided to take a risk, to break the silence. "Father?" I asked, my voice soft, barely a breath. He startled, a sharp intake of breath, and spun around, his hand instinctively going to the book, pulling it closer to his chest. His eyes, when they met mine, were wide with a mixture of fear and something else, a deep, profound weariness. He was younger than I expected, his face pale, etched with anxiety. Who speaks?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Just a traveler, father." "Lost my way," I said, offering the usual vague, non-committal explanation that had served me well so far. My appearance, now thoroughly weathered by the stolen clothes and a few days of medieval grind, seemed to put him slightly at ease. He probably just thought I was another vagabond. He hesitated, then slowly lowered his guard, though his grip on the book remained tight. "You found me, at prayer," he said, his voice regaining a measure of control, though it still held an undercurrent of unease. "It seemed a private prayer," I observed, gently. He looked at the book again, then back at me. And then, he did something utterly unexpected. He revealed the book, just slightly, enough for me to see the intricate, hand-drawn illuminations on its pages, and the script, not Latin, the common language of the church, but something else. Something older. Something forbidden. Ancient texts. This was a truly quirky, unusual detail, a glimpse into a hidden world of medieval intellectual descent. He was clearly hiding texts that were not meant for public consumption, perhaps even heretical ones. These are not for all eyes," he murmured, his voice dropping to a confessional whisper. "Knowledge can be dangerous. In the wrong hands." He looked at me again, his gaze searching. Do you fear heresy, son?" The question hung in the damp air, heavy with unspoken implications. Fear of heresy. In this world, it wasn't an abstract concept, it was a very real, very tangible threat. Accusations of heresy could lead to excommunication, torture, even death by burning at the stake. It was a mainstream historical fact that the Inquisition held immense power in the medieval period, rooting out and punishing perceived deviations from Orthodox Christian doctrine. My own historical knowledge, which often felt like a useless burden, suddenly became a lifeline. I understood the stakes. I thought about how to answer, how to navigate this treacherous terrain. I, a product of a world where information was free, often dangerously so, was now confronted with a world where knowledge was controlled, parceled out, and sometimes, violently suppressed. The contrast was stark. In my time, we worried about misinformation. Here, they worried about forbidden truth. "Father," I said, choosing my words carefully, slowly, as if weighing each one. "I have seen enough of the world to know that sometimes, what is considered heresy today, may be truth tomorrow. Or vice versa. My fear, rather, is of unquestioning ignorance. Of turning away from a path, simply because it is difficult, or because it is not sanctioned by men." It was a delicate dance, acknowledging the danger without condemning his actions, appealing to a higher truth without directly challenging the church's authority. He looked at me, a long, searching gaze, and in his eyes, I saw not suspicion, but a flicker of understanding, even a hint of desperation. It was a surprising religious element, this confessional moment, a priest, who should be the arbiter of faith, seeking solace and perhaps even validation from a wandering stranger. It blurred the lines between the shepherd and the lost sheep. Many documents leave open the possibility that many priests and scholars secretly questioned official church doctrine, driven by intellectual curiosity or personal revelation, often at great personal risk. There is no consensus on this matter. And perhaps there will never be consensus on the silent struggles within the medieval church. He finally nodded, a slow, almost imperceptible movement. Perhaps you speak with wisdom. The Holy Spirit moves in mysterious ways, does it not? Even through unexpected vessels. He closed the book, hiding it once more beneath his cloak, but the connection, the shared secret, lingered in the dim alley. It was a strange moment of connection, a subtle exchange of vulnerabilities, a quiet whisper of hope in the shadows of a dangerous world. It was a reminder that even in the most rigid of systems, there were always individuals who sought different paths, who dared to question, and who, perhaps, carried their own hidden truths. The encounter with the priest in the shadowed alley left a strange resonance within me, a subtle hum of shared secrets and unspoken fears. It was a fleeting moment, but it solidified a truth: even in a world defined by rigid dogma, there were cracks, whispers of dissent, and individuals seeking their own understanding. My fear of heresy, of accusation, was real, but so was a burgeoning sense of connection to the human spirit that defied easy categorization. The air in the alley, still damp and cool, seemed to hum with that unspoken tension. As I emerged from the alley, the scent of fresh-baked bread from the nearby oven hit me with renewed intensity. It was a grounding smell, a reminder of tangible needs. My stomach, which had been momentarily forgotten in the intrigue of forbidden texts, rumbled a loud protest. I knew, instinctively, that begging couldn't be my long-term solution. I needed a more stable footing, a way to contribute, to become a part of this world rather than just an observer. My mind drifted back to the tavern keeper, his booming laugh, the yeasty aroma of his brewery. He seemed a practical man, less concerned with esoteric theological debates and more with the honest craft of brewing. And I had gleaned enough from overhearing him to know a thing or two about the basics. This was it. My chance. A path to not just survival, but integration. I approached the alehouse with a newfound determination. The tavern keeper, busy scrubbing a large wooden vat, looked up as I entered, his brow furrowed. "Back again, lad. Stable's not messy enough for ye," he chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. "No, good sir," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "But I overheard you speaking of your brew. And I have a mind for it. Perhaps I could be of assistance. As an apprentice, if you'd have me." He set down his brush, his eyes narrowing slightly, assessing me. "An apprentice, eh? Many folk think brewing is just pouring water and stirring. It's an art, lad. A sacred trust." A faint smile played on his lips. He was testing me. "What do you know of brewing, then?" I took a deep breath. "I know of the malt, sir, and the hot water to release the sugars. I know of the boiling, and the hops for preservation. And I know of the yeast, sir. The Lord's own magic, as you say. The lifeblood of the brew." I even managed a slight, deferential bow, a gesture I'd learned from observing the villagers. It felt awkward, but hopefully, convincing. He grunted, a thoughtful sound. "Aye, the yeast. Many a batch ruined by a lazy hand or a cold brew. But what else, lad? What makes a good ale?" I thought back to the ale taster, the bizarre ritual. "Purity, sir," I ventured, choosing my words carefully. "And stickiness. The proper measure of body." I decided to hold back on the full details of the ale-tasting ritual, lest he think me mad. But the reference to stickiness seemed to resonate. He finally broke into a wide grin, slapping his knee with a hearty laugh. "Ha! Aye, the stickiness. You've got a keen ear, lad. Or a lucky guess. I'll give you a chance. You can help old Bartholomew with the mashing tomorrow. Learn the art, you say? Come morning, you'll be steeped in it, literally." Relief washed over me, a warm wave that spread from my chest to my fingertips. Brewmaster's apprentice. It sounded ridiculously grand for shoveling mashed grain, but it was a start. It was a foot in the door, a chance to learn skills that were genuinely valuable in this time. It was a mainstream historical fact that apprenticeships were the primary method of vocational training in the Middle Ages. Young people would commit years to learning a trade from a master, often living with their family, in exchange for room, board, and invaluable skills. It was a hands-on education, brutal but effective, far removed from the standardized tests and online courses of my past. The thought of learning the art of fermentation firsthand, not from a textbook or a YouTube video, but from the raw, sensory experience, filled me with a strange excitement. It was practical science, real knowledge, tangible and immediate. I'd always been a hands-on learner, even in the post-apocalyptic world, figuring out how to jury-rig repairs or scavenge for useful parts. This was just another form of that, albeit with much less chrome and much more rustic charm. And as for the religious element, the tavern keeper's mention of sacred trust echoed in my mind. Brewing wasn't just a trade, it was seen as a sacred craft, a gift from God. The success of a brew was often attributed to divine blessing, and failures to divine displeasure or ill omens. Many documents leave open the possibility that brewers often performed small, personal blessings over their ingredients or equipment, quiet acts of piety that ensured a good yield. There is no consensus on this matter. And perhaps there will never be consensus on how much genuine spiritual belief influenced the practicalities of medieval craft. It was a stark contrast to my world, where quality control was all about sterile environments and precise measurements. Here, it was about faith, skill, and a healthy dose of hopeful prayer. I spent the rest of the evening listening intently, absorbing every word, every gesture, trying to pick up the unspoken rules of this new profession. The smell of malt, the warmth emanating from the brewing vats, it was more than just a place to sleep now. It was a workshop, a classroom, a sanctuary. My mind, which had been a battlefield of anxiety and nostalgia, began to settle. Here, in the heart of this ancient craft, I found a strange kind of peace. It was a tangible step forward, a small victory against the overwhelming odds of time travel. My days as a brewmaster's apprentice began with the pre-dawn chill, the clatter of wooden buckets, and the pervasive, comforting aroma of fermenting grain. Bartholomew, the tavern keeper, proved to be a gruff but patient teacher, his hands scarred from years of handling hot mash and heavy barrels. He taught by doing, his explanations sparse but clear, often accompanied by a pointed grunt or a knowing nod. My modern brain, accustomed to step-by-step manuals and online tutorials, had to relearn how to absorb knowledge through observation, through touch, through the very rhythm of the work. The process of brewing, I quickly discovered, was a delicate balance of science and instinct. We started with the malted barley, a mainstream historical fact. Malting, the process of steeping barley in water to germinate, then drying it, was crucial because it produced enzymes that converted the grain starches into fermentable sugars. Without malting, there would be no ale, just soggy grain. It was an ancient biotechnology, surprisingly sophisticated for its time. We'd crush the malt, then mix it with hot water in large wooden vats, creating a sweet liquid called wort. The air in the brewery would thicken with the sweet, bready scent, almost edible. Then came the boiling, a long, laborious process over an open fire. Bartholomew would toss in handfuls of dried hops, their bitter aroma cutting through the sweetness of the wort. For flavor, he'd grunt, and to keep the little devils from spoiling it. He meant the unwanted bacteria, of course, though he'd never heard the word. He just knew what worked. This understanding of hops as a preservative was a crucial, lesser-known detail that revolutionized brewing in the Middle Ages. Before hops became widespread, ale spoiled quickly, often within days. Hops extended its shelf life, allowing for larger batches and distribution. It was an accidental stroke of genius, discovered through trial and error over centuries. My hands, once accustomed to keyboards and touchscreens, rapidly hardened. I learned to heft heavy sacks of grain, to stir the bubbling wort with a paddle taller than myself, to scrub out massive vats until my arms ached. It was physically demanding, but deeply satisfying. There was a primal connection to the craft, a sense of creating something essential from basic ingredients. It was a far cry from the abstract, digital world I'd come from, and strangely, it was profoundly healing. The constant physical exertion, the focus required for each task, left little room for the lingering anxieties of PTSD, for the echoing sense of displacement. My mind was too busy calculating temperatures, observing textures, listening to the subtle gurgle of fermentation. One day, Bartholomew pointed to a small, almost invisible crack in the stone wall behind the largest brewing vat. "Old Mother Agnes, she swears a Holy Spirit lives in that crack," he said, a twinkle in his eye. "Keeps the ale from souring." Always make sure to offer a little blessing to it. A quirky, unusual detail, this blend of practical brewing and folk superstition. Every morning, before starting the brew, Bartholomew would briefly touch the crack, murmuring a quick prayer. It was a small, personal religious element, a quiet acknowledgement of the mystical forces they believed governed their lives. Many documents leave open the possibility that such localized, personal forms of piety, often tied to specific places or objects, were a widespread part of medieval Christian belief, blending seamlessly with official doctrine. There is no consensus on this matter. And perhaps there will never be consensus on the precise blend of faith and folklore. To them, a good brew wasn't just about the right ingredients, it was about the right blessings. I found myself adopting some of his habits, quietly, almost instinctively. Before adding the yeast, I'd pause, my hand hovering over the foamy liquid, and offer a silent, modern blessing, a silent wish for success, for safety, for the brew to turn out. It wasn't a religious prayer in the traditional sense, not for me, but it was an acknowledgement of the unknown, a small surrender to forces beyond my control. It was a way to nurture trust, to build a fragile hope in a world that often felt utterly hopeless. It was a small, personal ritual that offered comfort, a quiet bridge between my old life and this new, unexpected one. The smell of the fermenting ale became a kind of lullaby, its sweet, yeasty scent filling my senses as I drifted off to sleep in the loft above. I was still a stranger in a strange land, but now, I was a stranger with a purpose, a craftsman learning an ancient art. And in the steady rhythm of the brew, I found a measure of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace you found in a quiet room with soft music, but a robust, earthy peace, earned through labor and a simple, profound act of creation. It was the kind of peace that could lull even the most troubled mind into a semblance of rest. The rhythm of brewing became my new heartbeat, a steady pulse of mashing, boiling, and fermenting. Days bled into weeks, marked by the rising and setting of the sun, by the slow progression of the seasons. My hands grew calloused, my back stronger, and the language of the village, once a jumble of strange sounds, slowly became coherent, each word a new anchor in this bewildering reality. Bartholomew, my taciturn master, was a man of few words but profound intuition, and I absorbed his knowledge like a thirsty sponge. Then came the day, a crisp autumn morning, when Bartholomew faced me, his eyes gleaming with a mix of challenge and a surprising hint of pride. "Lad," he grunted, gesturing towards a newly tapped barrel of our latest brew, "it's time. Time you truly proved your knowledge. Time you sat in judgment." My stomach clenched. I knew exactly what he meant. The ale taster's chair. Or, more accurately, the ale taster's puddle. The bizarre ritual I had witnessed on my first full day in this impossible world. My mind, ever the modern skeptic, recoiled. The thought of deliberately sitting in a puddle of cold, sticky ale, especially my ale, was less than appealing. It felt utterly archaic, unhygienic, and frankly, ridiculous. Yet, I also understood its significance. This wasn't just a test of the ale, it was a test of my understanding, my integration, my acceptance of their world and its peculiar ways. He poured a generous amount of the fresh brew onto a smooth, flat stone just outside the alehouse door. The dark liquid spread, shimmering faintly in the pale morning light, its familiar, sweet aroma rising into the cool air. It looked inviting, delicious, until I remembered its intended purpose. My internal monologue was a chaotic blend of medieval necessity and modern disgust. Just breathe. It's for survival. Think of it as a very peculiar form of quality control. Go on, then, Bartholomew urged, his voice surprisingly soft. The people need to know that their ale is pure. That their brewmaster's apprentice is true. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic hammering of my heart. This was it. A seat of judgment, indeed. Not for me to judge the ale, but for the ale to judge me. I carefully, deliberately, lowered myself into the puddle. The cold liquid immediately soaked through my rough breeches, a shockingly unpleasant sensation. It was sticky, clinging to the fabric, sending a shiver up my spine. I squirmed slightly, making sure the ale had fully saturated the cloth, just as I had seen the original ale taster do. I waited, forcing myself to remain still, acutely aware of Bartholomew's watchful gaze. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant caw of a crow and the soft rustle of autumn leaves. Then, slowly, I stood up. I turned, presenting my ale-soaked backside to Bartholomew. He bent down, sniffed, and then, to my profound relief and mild horror, pressed a finger to the damp cloth and brought it to his tongue. He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Sticky," he pronounced, his voice low and firm. "Good. The brew is pure. And you, lad, you're one of us now." A mainstream historical fact that underpinned this bizarre ritual, ale tasting by sitting in it, was a real, albeit localized and largely symbolic, practice in medieval England. It was based on the simple principle that good ale, being rich in sugars, would be sticky enough to make the taster's leather breeches adhere to a wooden bench or stone. If the ale was watered down or poor quality, the breeches wouldn't stick. It served as a public demonstration of quality, assuring consumers and upholding the brewer's reputation. It was a very hands-on approach to consumer protection, you might say. And certainly one that would never pass modern health inspections. The religious element, subtle as it was present even here. Before I sat, Bartholomew had whispered a quick, almost imperceptible blessing over the puddle, a common appeal for divine favor on the product, a prayer for its purity. It was a quiet acknowledgement that even in this seemingly absurd ritual, there was a spiritual dimension, a hope that God would ensure the quality of their essential beverage. Many documents leave open the possibility that such small, private blessings were commonplace, weaving faith into every aspect of daily life, but there is no consensus on this matter. And perhaps there will never be consensus on how much genuine piety was behind such practices versus simple superstition. It was a profound moment. Not because of the ale, but because of the acceptance. It wasn't just about proving my knowledge of brewing, it was about proving my willingness to submit to their customs, to truly integrate. It was a bizarre, quirky detail of medieval life that I had now experienced firsthand, a memory far stranger than any I'd collected from my former world. I chuckled to myself, a slightly damp, triumphant sound. Who knew the path to acceptance in the Middle Ages involved a beer-soaked posterior? My old friends would never believe it. Then again, they wouldn't believe any of this. With the ale-tasting ritual complete, and my breeches still faintly sticky, a strange sense of belonging began to settle over me. Bartholomew's gruff nod of approval felt more profound than any diploma from my old world. I was no longer just a traveler, I was an accepted part of their world, a cog in the vital, yeasty machine of ale production. The days continued to flow with the rhythm of the brew, filled with the warmth of the brewing vats and the earthy aroma of malt. One evening, after a particularly long day of scrubbing barrels and mashing grain, Bartholomew and I were enjoying a well-earned measure of our own ale. The alehouse was dimly lit by flickering rushlights and the glow of the hearth, the air thick with wood smoke and the low hum of conversation. The ale, fresh and pure, warmed me from the inside out, loosening the tightness that had often gripped my chest since my unexpected journey. It was a comfortable scene, the kind that almost made me forget the centuries separating me from my true home. Then, the murmuring shifted. Two men, their faces flushed with ale and indignation, were speaking in low, urgent tones in a dark corner of the tavern. I recognized one as a minor landholder from a neighboring hamlet, known for his hot temper and his disdain for the local lord. The other was a shifty-eyed merchant who often passed through, always looking for an angle. Their voices, though hushed, carried in the quiet of the late hour. "The lord takes too much," the landholder growled, his hand tightening around his tankard. "His levies for this cursed war, they bleed us dry." "Aye," the merchant hissed back, his eyes darting around. "And his justice is swift, but not always fair. My cousin, for a mere foul, lost his hand. My blood ran cold." This wasn't just idle complaints, this was genuine, festering resentment. The lord they spoke of was the local feudal overlord, a powerful figure whose authority was absolute. It was a mainstream historical fact that feudal lords held immense power over their tenants and peasants, including the right to levy taxes, demand military service, and administer justice, often with harsh and disproportionate punishments. The concept of justice, in this era, was far removed from modern legal systems, often relying on arbitrary decisions and brutal physical penalties. It was a constant source of tension and, sometimes, open rebellion. My modern mind, accustomed to checks and balances, found this stark reality profoundly unsettling. The landholder leaned closer, his voice dropping to an even more dangerous whisper. Perhaps it is time for a change. Persuasion. He will be riding through the woods next week, returning from the hunt. With only a small guard. My heart hammered against my ribs. A plot. Against the Lord. This was far beyond simple tavern gossip. This was a direct threat, a conspiracy that could have dire consequences for the entire village, if it went wrong. And in this brutal world, going wrong usually meant swift, violent retribution. The moral conflict brewed inside me, as potent as any ale. Do I intervene? Do I warn the Lord, potentially exposing myself and endangering the very acceptance I had just found? Or do I remain silent, allowing a violent act to unfold, complicit in its outcome? A quirky, unusual detail I noticed during their hushed conversation was how the merchant, as he spoke of the Lord's unfair justice, repeatedly traced a small, inverted triangle in the condensation on his wooden table. It was a subtle, almost unconscious gesture, but I remembered reading about apotropaic symbols, ancient signs meant to ward off evil or bad luck, sometimes used to curse enemies or express discontent in a way that wouldn't be overtly blasphemous. This quiet, almost ritualistic action was a muted expression of deep-seated anger and defiance, a small, personal religious element of rebellion. Many documents leave open the possibility that common people often resorted to such subtle, symbolic acts of defiance against authority, blending folk magic with their more official religious beliefs. There is no consensus on this matter. And perhaps there will never be consensus on the precise nature of these hidden acts of rebellion. The ale in my tankard, which had felt so comforting moments before, now tasted bitter, like gall. The world, which I had just begun to understand, suddenly felt incredibly precarious. This wasn't just a historical simulation, it was real, with real stakes, real lives hanging in the balance. My modern moral compass spun wildly, unable to find true north in the shifting sands of medieval ethics. Was justice in this world simply about who held the most power? And if so, what role did a time-traveling apprentice play in its brutal calculus? I suddenly missed the simple, clear-cut problems of my post-apocalyptic past. Find food, find shelter, avoid raiders. Here, the dangers were more insidious, hidden beneath layers of tradition, faith, and simmering resentment. The knowledge I had gained about brewing, about the village, now felt like a double-edged sword. I was integrated, yes, but integration meant entanglement. And entanglement meant consequences. The warmth of the ale gave way to a cold knot of dread in my gut. My comfortable spot by the hearth suddenly felt like a cage. The overheard plot against the Lord curdled the ale in my stomach, turning the comforting warmth into a knot of cold dread. My mind raced, torn. To speak up meant risking everything I had painstakingly built here, my hard-won acceptance, my apprenticeship, perhaps even my life. To remain silent meant complicity in violence, a betrayal of the tenuous peace I had found. The flickering rushlights in the tavern seemed to cast long, dancing shadows of impending doom. I couldn't stay. The weight of that secret, the impending violence, pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. My years of surviving in a broken world had taught me one thing: when things got complicated, when the lines blurred between right and wrong, between safety and peril, it was often best to simply disappear. To cut ties. To become, once more, a silent pilgrim. I waited until the tavern was truly quiet, the last embers in the hearth casting only a faint, ruddy glow. Bartholomew snored softly in his cot in the corner, oblivious. With a heavy heart, I gathered my few possessions, the worn, scavenged clothes, the little pouch of rye bread and dried meat I'd been saving. I left the small, wooden cross Bartholomew had carved for me on the counter, a silent thank you, a bittersweet farewell. Slipping out into the pre-dawn darkness, the village was eerily silent, cloaked in a thick, cold mist that clung to the thatched roofs and seeped into my bones. The air smelled of damp earth and the distant, unseen river. My footsteps were muffled by the wet ground, ghost-like as I moved away from the familiar lanes, past the silent church and towards the winding path that led out of the valley. My mind was a whirlwind of whispered prayers, not formal ones, but raw, desperate appeals. Please, let them be safe. Please, let me be safe. Please, let me find something. It was a quiet religious element, this whispered litany, a primal calling to whatever force governed this impossible world. In the absence of logical solutions, faith, even a nascent, reluctant one, became a lifeline. It was a testament to the human need for something to cling to in times of profound uncertainty. Many documents leave open the possibility that such personal, unarticulated prayers were far more common than formal petitions, especially among those on the margins of society, reflecting a deep, ingrained spirituality that transcended formal doctrine. There is no consensus on this matter. And perhaps, there will never be consensus on the quiet desperation of the human heart. The physical act of walking, putting distance between myself and the brewing storm, was strangely therapeutic. Each step was a small assertion of agency, a declaration that I was still in control of something, even if it was just my own movement. My PTSD, which often manifested as a paralyzing sense of helplessness, found some relief in this forced march. Movement, even flight, was a kind of coping mechanism. It was better than being trapped, better than waiting for the hammer to fall. As the sun began to paint the eastern sky with pale streaks of orange and pink, I found myself on a narrow, overgrown track, winding deeper into the ancient, silent forest. The trees here were even older, their trunks gnarled and thick with moss, their branches interwoven like the vaulted ceilings of a forgotten cathedral. The air grew colder, damp with the lingering mist, carrying the scent of pine needles and decaying leaves. There was a sense of profound solitude, almost overwhelming. A mainstream historical fact, forests in the medieval period were vast and dangerous places, often infested with outlaws, wild animals, and superstition. Travel was perilous, and being alone in the wilderness was a terrifying prospect. My modern reliance on GPS and clear pathways felt like a distant, absurd memory. Here, every rustle in the undergrowth, every snapped twig, was a potential threat. My senses, honed by my previous survival experiences, were on high alert, scanning for danger, listening for the faintest sound of pursuit. A quirky, unusual detail I noticed as I walked was the presence of small, almost hidden stone markers along the path, crude carvings of a stylized hand with an outstretched finger, always pointing deeper into the woods. They were barely visible, worn smooth by centuries of weather. It was a quiet, unassuming detail, a whisper from the past. I didn't know their meaning, but they felt like a silent guide, a path laid by others, long gone, who had also sought escape or sanctuary. Perhaps they were ancient waymarkers, or perhaps something more mystical, a subtle beckoning. Historians are still debating whether such seemingly innocuous marks were purely functional way signs, or if they held deeper, symbolic meanings, perhaps related to ancient pilgrim routes or hidden hermitages. There is no consensus on this matter. And perhaps, there will never be consensus. I walked for hours, pushing through the thick undergrowth, my clothes damp, my stomach rumbling. The whispered prayers continued, a low, persistent hum in my mind. Not for salvation, not for miracles, but for simple safety, for a place to rest, for a moment of peace. The image of the distant monastery, its bells still ringing faintly in my memory, drifted into my thoughts. Sanctuary. A place of learning. A place of peace. It was a desperate hope, a single, flickering flame against the vast darkness of the unknown. And towards that faint light, I trudged, one weary step after another. Time stretches. My supplies dwindle, hunger is a familiar ache. My resolve is tested. The forest is vast, unending. I must find shelter, find water. I am deep in the ancient woods, the air cold and still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine. The sounds are just the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird. No human voice. No bells. A whisper, a desperate plea, sanctuary. Peace. Find the bells. The silent pilgrimage through the ancient woods was a blur of aching muscles and whispered prayers. Each rustle of leaves, each snapping twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, a primal fear of the unknown. But beneath the fear, a deeper yearning began to form, a magnetic pull towards the distant memory of monastery bells. Sanctuary. The word resonated in my weary mind like a promise, a beacon of hope in the vast wilderness. After what felt like an eternity, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in fiery hues, I saw it. Not a grand, imposing fortress, but a humble cluster of stone buildings, nestled in a secluded clearing. Smoke curled lazily from a few chimneys, and the faint, unmistakable scent of wood smoke and old stone drifted on the breeze. And then, the sound, dong, dong, dong. The bells. Deeper, richer, closer than ever before. This wasn't just a refuge, it was the source of that resonant sound that had first drawn me into this impossible world. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding, but not with fear this time, more with a profound sense of exhausted relief. The gate was a simple wooden affair, unbarred. Hesitantly, I pushed it open and stepped into a quiet courtyard. Monks. They moved with a serene purpose, their hooded robes a muted gray against the ancient stone. They looked up as I entered, their faces calm, unperturbed by my unexpected appearance. One monk, older than the others, with kind eyes and a gentle smile, approached me. "Peace be with you, traveler," he said, his voice soft, yet resonating with an inner strength. "You look weary. Do you seek solace here?" "Sanctuary, Father," I managed, my voice hoarse from disuse and emotion. "And, perhaps a place to serve." He nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "The Lord's bounty is for all who seek it. Come. We have food, warmth, and the quiet devotion of prayer." And so, I found refuge. The monastery was a world unto itself, a pocket of peace and diligent work. My initial experiences were simple, fetching water, sweeping floors, tending the small kitchen garden. The food was plain, mostly root vegetables and thick, wholesome bread, but it was regular, and prepared with a quiet reverence that made it taste better than any gourmet meal I could recall from my past. The communal prayers, chanted in Latin, became a soothing rhythm, a balm to my still troubled mind. I wasn't a believer in their God, not yet, but I recognized the profound power of collective faith, the shared human need for meaning and connection. What surprised me most, however, was the monastery's library. It was not vast, but it held a collection of beautifully illuminated manuscripts, chronicles, and, to my immense fascination, detailed texts on ancient brewing and medicinal arts. It was a mainstream historical fact that monasteries were centers of learning and knowledge preservation during the Middle Ages, often serving as the sole repositories of texts and intellectual traditions that might otherwise have been lost. They were the original universities, quietly cataloging and studying a world that was often consumed by chaos. It was here, amidst the silent, dusty pages, that I truly began to unravel the complex blend of faith, science, and practical knowledge that defined this era. I spent hours poring over the brewing texts, illuminated with precise, if somewhat stylized, drawings of vats and tools. I learned about the subtle differences in local grains, the nuances of water sources, the importance of maintaining consistent temperatures, even the specific prayers recited over each stage of the fermentation process. It was ancient brewing knowledge, presented not as theoretical science, but as a deeply spiritual art. A quirky, unusual detail I discovered was a marginal note in one of the texts, describing how some monks believed that a prayer spoken truly into the rising steam of the wort would imbue the ale with healing properties, especially for ailments of the spirit. It was a beautiful blend of practical observation and profound faith. The religious element here was woven into the very fabric of existence. Brewing wasn't just a craft, it was a form of devotion, an act of creation in partnership with God. The monks saw the transformation of grain into ale as a divine miracle, a tangible manifestation of God's grace. Many documents leave open the possibility that specific monastic orders developed unique brewing techniques not just for economic reasons, but as part of their spiritual discipline, believing the quality of their ale reflected their piety. There is no consensus on this matter. And perhaps there will never be consensus on the full extent to which spiritual practice and practical craftsmanship intertwine. Studying these ancient texts, I found a strange kind of peace. My mind, which had once been overwhelmed by the chaos of my time displacement, began to find patterns, connections. The methodical, almost ritualistic pursuit of knowledge, whether spiritual or practical, provided a powerful antidote to the lingering sense of directionlessness. Here, in the quiet halls of the monastery, surrounded by centuries of accumulated wisdom, I began to heal. The distant hum of modern conveniences, the frantic pace of my old life, seemed to recede, replaced by the gentle scratching of quills, the rustle of turning pages, and the pervasive, comforting scent of old parchment and brewing grain. It was a sanctuary for the mind, as much as for the body, a place where the old world and the new began to find a fragile, unexpected harmony. My time in the monastery flowed like the gentle current of a hidden stream, each day a quiet lesson, each night a deep, restorative calm. The ancient brewing texts, once daunting in their unfamiliar script and mystical overtones, slowly unveiled their secrets, revealing a sophisticated understanding of natural processes, albeit cloaked in the language of faith. I learned not just the mechanics of fermentation, but the philosophy behind it, the monks' deep respect for the bounty of the earth and the mystery of creation. The quiet, contemplative life, so different from the frantic pace of my past, brought a profound sense of healing. The anxiety, the gnawing sense of displacement, slowly receded, replaced by a quiet acceptance. This life, this blend of old and new, of practical skill and deep spirituality, was becoming my new normal. It wasn't a return to my old world, but a creation of a new one, built on ancient foundations. The raw wound of time travel began to scar over, leaving behind not bitterness, but a strange, quiet gratitude. I learned to value the simple craftsmanship of their world, the sturdy, hand-carved wooden tools, the thick, hand-woven fabrics, the enduring strength of stone architecture. There was no planned obsolescence here, no frantic pursuit of the next shiny new thing. Everything was built to last, imbued with the care and skill of human hands. It made me reflect on the fleeting nature of so many of our modern conveniences, the endless cycle of upgrades and disposables. Here, utility and durability were paramount, and there was a quiet dignity in that. The monks, in their unwavering faith, taught me about a different kind of strength. Not the physical strength of my past life as a survivor, but the resilience of the spirit, the power of belief in something greater than oneself. I still didn't fully embrace their specific doctrines, but I understood the profound comfort and direction that faith provided in a world where answers were scarce and life was often brutal. It was a testament to the enduring human need for meaning, for connection to something beyond the tangible. I spent my days assisting in the monastery's own brewery, which produced an exceptionally fine, strong ale for both consumption and medicinal purposes. It was a mainstream historical fact that monastic breweries were renowned for the quality of their ale, often developing unique strains of yeast and brewing techniques that were far more advanced than those of secular brewers. This was partly due to their disciplined approach, but also to their sustained records and observations, the earliest forms of scientific method applied to brewing. It was a subtle blend of prayer and practical science, a testament to their dedication. A quirky, unusual detail I observed was how the elder monks, when checking the temperature of the mash, would often hold a small, smooth river stone in their hand, placing it on the outside of the brewing vessel. They believed the stone would sing to them, guiding their hand to the perfect temperature. It was a charming blend of folk wisdom and intuitive physical sensation. Many documents leave open the possibility that such personal, tactile methods of measurement were common in the absence of standardized tools, often intertwined with superstitious beliefs about the efficacy of natural objects. There is no consensus on this matter. And perhaps, there will never be consensus on the blurred lines between ancient science and practical magic. The religious element, a constant presence in the monastery, began to feel less like an external imposition and more like an inner rhythm. The chanting, the prayers, the quiet contemplation, they became a part of my own psychological landscape, a way to quiet the restless mind. It was a delicate balance, this spiritual journey. Not a conversion, perhaps, but an opening, a recognition of the universal human need for hope, for a sense of divine justice in a chaotic world. I often found myself murmuring whispered blessings before adding hops to the work, or offering a silent prayer of gratitude over a freshly baked loaf of bread. These weren't grand gestures, but small, personal acknowledgments of the interconnectedness of all things, a gentle blend of my modern understanding and their ancient reverence. It was a way to integrate, not just into their society, but into their worldview. The candlelight flickers, casting long, dancing shadows across the page of this makeshift journal. The distant hoot of an owl, the soft rustle of pine needles outside the monastery walls, these are the sounds that lull me now. My hands, once soft from a life of ease, are rough and calloused, bearing the marks of honest labor. My mind, once cluttered with the anxieties of a broken future, now holds the wisdom of a vibrant past. I've learned to make fire from flint, to track game by faint signs, to mend my own clothes with needle and thread. These are not just survival skills, they are connections. Connections to the earth, to the ancestors who walked this path before me, to the enduring resilience of the human spirit. I still miss the conveniences of my old world, the ease of instant communication, the warmth of a heated home. Oh, how I sometimes ache for a simple, hot shower, or the ability to call a loved one. But I also carry a new appreciation for the quiet dignity of life lived simply, for the deep satisfaction of creating something with your own hands. This journey, impossible as it seems, has taught me that strength isn't just about survival, it's about adaptation. It's about finding meaning in the unfamiliar, beauty in the rustic, and hope in the quiet rhythms of life. It's about accepting that some questions may never have answers, and finding peace in the not knowing. The circle closes, not with a return, but with an integration. I am a blend of old and new, a whisper from the future walking among the echoes of the past. And in that blend, I have found a profound, quiet healing. Still awake. Respect. What level insomniac are you now? Face with tears of joy, drop a comment, Night Owl plus Insomnia level, to claim your official certificate from the International Sleepless Federation. Those who knocked out by minute 15 won't even know this exists, snoozers miss out, haha bye.